Meredith Vickers was Weyland Industries supervisor on the US CSS Prometheus during its journey to LV-223, and she was actually the daughter of great Sir Peter Weyland and also the acting CEO of Weyland Industries, a cold, cynical woman forged by a cold and cynical circumstance. Vickers eventually found herself being second in her father's eyes to a robot, and eventually she perished in the destruction of the moon LV-223. Meredith Vickers was a very cynical and straight to the point and unempathetic individual. A lot of these specific qualities about her personality were directly driven by the treatment and expectations placed upon her by her father. She was treated harshly by her father, and Peter Weyland always wanted a son, and he tried time and time again to have a child, and for that child to be a girl who could not carry on his legacy's name caused him great disarray. From the time she was born, Weyland basically disowned her, ridiculed her, and never gave her any praise, always making her feel inferior and eventually somewhat replacing her with the David 8 synthetic model, which Weyland actually eventually started calling and considering his son, and only really ever acknowledged him from that point forward as his only child. This all may be the reason Meredith Vickers took the last name Vickers instead of Weyland, as basically a fuck you to Weyland and his egotistical ways. While it is possible that she was married at some point, I find it quite unlikely due to her less than cooperative stance on human-to-human long-term interactions. Vickers was born in the year 2057 in Britain in the UK on Earth, and was parented by Peter Weyland and a mother we know close to nothing about. Her childhood and early life, as we already discussed, was less than desirable, with her suffering great disdain from her father, and as the viewer, we really don't know what happened to her mother. Whether she left, she died, or simply stood back and allowed it to happen to her daughter at the hands of her father. During her teenage and early adult life, she studied business management at Oxford, greatly excelled in her field, and eventually graduated and gained a high board position in her father's company, which most likely would have been hard to achieve due to her father's demeanour. By the time of the events just before the film Prometheus, when Peter Weyland decided he would be secretly taking part in the mission to LV-223 to try and attain eternal life from his pipe-trim gods, the engineers, Vickers was instead working her way up the ranks and was sitting in a position where her father's passing would lead to her being able to seize power over Weyland Industries. Begrudgingly, she decided to tag along on the Prometheus expedition in order to keep tabs on her father and his mad attempts to live forever and have a forever existence, secretly hoping that he would die due to his rapidly deteriorating body as he was exceeding the age of 100, so that she could then go back home and become the new CEO of Weyland Industries without her father to demean her. Vickers, however, found the very idea of the Prometheus mission a waste of time and money. Whilst it was worth it if it meant her father would perish on the journey, and to see him be crushed if he was proved wrong, it was still a $1 trillion investment of the company's money that would likely have never seen a return. Vickers acted as the director of the project for her father whilst he pretended to be a dead man. Vickers was responsible for hiring a large majority of the crew that took part in the mission. Meredith Vickers eventually entered her own private hypersleep chambers aboard the USCSS Prometheus, separated from the rest of the crew, and after sleeping for 2 years, Vickers, along with the rest of the crew, eventually arrive at the moon and briefly recover from the sickening effects of a long hypersleep. Now, years after their departure from Earth in 2091, now in 2093, the crew ready themselves to be debriefed and take part in the mission. Vickers, immediately after waking up, begun to do push-ups in order to regain her muscle strength. They had begun to atrophy due to the extended space flight in cryostasis. She then instructs David and her brother of sorts to awaken the rest of the crew, and David stood as someone for Meredith Vickers to direct all her hatred at, as her father considered this specific android his son, and whilst almost disowning his own blood-related daughter at the same time. After calling a meeting and allowing Dr. Shaw and Holloway to debrief the crew on their expedition, as it had been deemed confidential information due to the massive implications of what they were trying to achieve and discover, Vickers called the doctors for a private meeting. After a brief discussion, Vickers makes the intent of the mission clear, and while the good doctors may have thought that they were in charge, it was Vickers who held all the cards, and nothing would be done on the surface of LV-223 without her authorization. After this, they prepared for the descent to the moon's surface, and once landing, the crew began to prepare themselves for the hostile environment of LV-223, and more so the temples they had noticed whilst landing. Meredith Vickers, however, remained with the other bridge officers and Captain Yannick in the ship, whilst the away team went to investigate. Despite this, she was kept constantly informed and updated of the crew's ventures through an array of video and audio display units. After observing the crew encounter a large form of holographic recording, and having it lead them to a large fossilized body, Yannick and Vickers witnessed Shaw obtaining the samples of a supposed engineer creator of humanity. Up until this point, Vickers had denoted the very idea that the engineers even existed. However, slowly but surely, she began to come to realise that she may have been wrong, and the final nail was placed in the metaphorical coffin when the engineer's body was found. Shaw and Holloway had been right all along, and her father may just have a chance at surviving and continuing to hold her back from her takeover of Weyland Industries. Soon after, the ship's sensors indicate that a large storm would soon arrive in the vicinity of the ship and the temples, making it near impossible for the crew to return to the ship. Vickers informs the away team that if they do not make it back within the 15-minute safe period, when the ship's blast doors closed, then they would be left outside in the storm or have to huddle in the temple. They eventually make it back, and after a short dilemma with Shaw being almost whisked away by the storm to save their engineer head, she was saved by Holloway and David, and after a head check is done, it is revealed that Milburn and Fifield were left trapped behind in the temples. Vickers went to view the examination of the engineer's head by Shaw, Dr. Ford and David. Shaw and Ford decided to try and reactivate the preserved nerve cells of the engineer. Whilst this did temporarily revive it, in order to learn more about it, the situation became very quickly dire, as the head began to suffer a large amount of violent mutations, which resulted in the head needing to be contained just prior to exploding into a gooey, disgusting mess. Unimpressed, Vickers leaves, and after David communes with Peter Weyland, her father, via a alpha wave visor helmet, Vickers forces David to tell her what her father said to him. David simply told her that her father told them they need to try harder. About done with everyone, she leaves in a rage and goes to cool off, eventually stumbling into the bridge, where she is startled by Captain Yannick. Yannick engages in a conversation with Vickers, trying to get her to admit she was wandering around trying to get laid. She quickly shoots him down, and in a last-ditch attempt, Yannick shares his suspicion of her being an android due to her cold behaviour. Vickers, slightly shocked, responds by telling him to meet her in her room in 10 minutes. Later the next day, when the storm subsides, Vickers sits back to view the crew's second visit to the engineer's temple, with one group going to find Milburn and Fifield, and the other consisting of David going to explore the temples further and investigate a life sign ping that had been popping in and out sporadically since they arrived. Vickers watched as David discovered the signal source, and just before cutting his feed to hide the discovery from her, an act which further frustrated Vickers. After the away team's search for their missing team members turns up finding Milburn's dead body, they begin to hightail it back to the Prometheus, with Shaw and Yannick demanding quarantine procedures be prepared for their return. Vickers inquires about why such a thing is even necessary, with Shaw stating that Holloway was sick. After they arrive back at the Prometheus, Holloway is refused entry as he begins a round of horrific mutations. As they try and get Holloway aboard, Vickers makes herself present, and with a flamethrower in hand, she denies Holloway entry onto the ship due to the fear of whatever sickness he was harbouring spreading amongst the crew, and more importantly, herself. Yannick pleaded along with Shaw for him to be put into quarantine, however Vickers wasn't having it, and when Holloway began more mutations, he decided that was it. He moved forward towards Vickers. She gave him a signal of warning and then fired the flamethrower at him, burning his body and slowly killing him in the process. Holloway sacrificed himself to Vickers' cleansing fire in order to stop her from kicking Shaw out with him. Soon after a mass of chaos, Vickers goes to see her father, who has now been awakened from her secret slumber aboard the Prometheus, with David revealing that he had discovered in the temple an engineer in stasis. And after Vickers once more tries to convince her father that his reign was at an end and that he was making a mistake, he just ignored her and shows her again the cruel, callous, closed fist of disappointment before dismissing her. After this, Vickers goes and records a private transmission which is sent to an unknown recipient via the Comnet communication system. In her message, she justifies the killing of Holloway, stating that she had to be the one to manage the madness of this fool's errand that her father had sent them on. Going on, she continues to defame Weyland as a poor old man who can't wrangle the concept of his own death, and no matter the outcome of his visit with the engineers, when he returned, she would once and for all be relieving him of his duties, as he is no longer a man fit to run their company. Once Weyland and a few of the other members, including Shaw, arrive to greet the slumbering god, Vickers and the bridge crew watch on as they awaken and revive the slumbering engineer. The colossal being rises and stands feet above everyone else in the room, gazing out, observing its new strange audience. Shaw attempted to question the engineer about why they wish to destroy humanity, but she is quickly silenced by the security officers by order of Weyland. The engineer, fed up with the situation, decapitates David and uses the head to fracture Weyland's skull, effectively killing him, and then goes on to kill the rest of the crew members, with only Shaw making a very near escape. Vickers witnesses her father being laid to waste by the very thing he had hoped would bestow him with immortality, and with a strange form of relief washing over her, she ordered for them to start up the ship and take them home as the mission was over. Soon after, Shaw makes it to the surface as the ground begins to shift just in front of the Prometheus, as it is revealed that it is really a roof opening to a massive underground chamber, housing an engineer spacecraft. As the ship rises and begins to prepare to head to Earth to finish what the engineers started 2,000 years ago and wipe out humanity, Shaw pleads with Yannick to stop the ship by any means necessary, as if it escapes, there won't be any Earth to go back to. Yannick knew what was at stake, but Vickers did not care. She had finally got what she wanted her entire life, domination over her father's legacy. She wasn't giving that up for some desperate attempt to take down the engineer craft. However, it was out of her control. Yannick wasted no time in ordering the ion thrusters to be warmed up and ready for activation on his command. The bridge crew say that it will turn the ship into a bullet whilst in atmosphere, but that is just what Yannick was counting on. Vickers could not believe what she was hearing. Complete insanity. She began to freak out with her coming mortality about to quite literally hit her on the head. Yannick gives her two choices. She can stay with him and the crew, or she can take the life pod equipped with 2 years of survival on the surface. She very immediately opts for the latter, and makes her escape onto the life pod to the surface of LV-223, where she lands by shore. Vickers quickly climbs from her pod and looks up to witness the Prometheus slam into the engineer's vessel as they knock a god from the heavens. Despite now having firmly 2 feet planted on the ground, the worst is yet to come for Vickers, as the now deactivated engineer's ship begins to plummet back towards the moon. Vickers and Shaw begin to run frantically out of the way of the now rolling vessel. While Shaw is successful, Vickers is not so lucky. She isn't able to evade the ship's advance, and the colossal weight of the ship begins to draw closer to her. She falls to the ground and tries to edge away from the ship, but this act is futile. And just as Vickers had finally got it all, her father gone, she had complete control of the company. It was simply taken away from her, just like that. Vickers was crushed to death by the enormous weight of the ship as it rolled over her body. Now, as a final little fun mention for the chapter of Vickers, I'd like to highlight a popular theory surrounding her, which points to the fact that she could actually be a super advanced form of synthetic. So facts that people have brought up to support this is her almost robot-like composure, her complete lack of empathy towards death and even killing. However, I feel this could mostly be explained by simply her being a cold, heartless person, forged by a ruthless father. Facts to go to prove that she is human include the fact that she is seen smoking, she is using cryosleep chambers, and spacesuits, which are not something an android would need to do. She is also seen quickly trying to readjust her body by doing push-ups after a long cryosleep period, not something that an android would need to do. However, a counter-argument could be made that explains that she simply does not realise she is synthetic. She has been made so perfectly that she is near indistinguishable from a human. But I would say that that is a larger stretch. Before I go, I just wanted to let you guys know about the merch store called ACHERON's Colonial Marketplace. Here you can pick up a variety of ACHERON and alien-themed merch from 3 distinct product lines, including shirts, hoodies, mugs, blankets, stickers, bags, and even phone cases. So if you want to support the channel and look good doing it, pick up some ACHERON merch. But what other videos would you guys like to see? If you have any ideas or have any questions you would like answered, please meet me down in the comments. If you did enjoy the video, please leave a like and go check out Project ACHERON on Twitter and Discord. If you want to support me further, you can become a patron where you can get access to early and behind the scenes content, the monthly and Alien Day giveaways, as well as the patron-only engraved set of items. I hope you guys did enjoy the video, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Until then, this is Project ACHERON, signing off.